From 90.7 WFAE, this is Charlotte Talks. I'm Tom Bullock in for Mike Collins, who is either currently writing the secret history of the accordion or taking a well-deserved vacation. I'll let you guys decide that. But in the meantime, it's the local news roundup, and joining me to talk through the week's news are... We'll start from my left for people who are watching on Facebook Live. Gwendolyn Glenn, of course, with WFAE. Katie Peralta, business reporter with the Charlotte Observer. Glenn Burkins, publisher and editor at QCityMetro. And on my far right, Erik Spanberg, senior business writer of the Charlotte Business Journal.
I'm working on an accordion memoir as well, but...
Strangely, I actually would believe that, Erik. And as always, we'd love to hear from you as well. Send us your questions to charlottetalks@wfae.org or just search us out on Facebook and Twitter. Now to our first big story of the week. When it comes to deciding whether a police officer should be punished for his or her actions, I'm willing to bet most people thought only two groups could weigh in, the CMPD itself and the district attorney's office. But there is a little-known third group that can have a say. That group is the Citizens Review Board, and as the name implies, it's made up of regular citizens, 11 to be precise. And earlier this week, they weighed in on a very controversial case, the killing of Keith Lamont Scott by CMPD officer Brentley Vinson. Gwendolyn, I know you were there for this closed-door meeting, and it's important to note, closed-door, but can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, it was a very long meeting. It went for about 5 hours, and as you said, it was closed door. They say that they have them behind closed doors because that they'll be discussing personnel issues, and the law allows them to do that. Mm-hmm. So by a vote of 8-2, they decided that there was substantial evidence of error in terms of the decision that the chief made that said that Officer Brentley Vinson was the one who fatally shot Keith Lamont Scott, that there was substantial evidence to suggest that there was an error when the chief said that he was lawful, it was lawful and a justified fatal shooting.
And it's not just the CMPD, it's important to note, that found that Officer Vinson acted in accordance with the law or was justified in shooting Mr. Scott. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney also said that, that they found no wrongdoing and that no criminal charges would be forthcoming. So how big a deal is this decision?
Well, they've never overturned a decision before, so that's what everybody is looking at. And after the hearing was over, I talked with Corinne Mac, who's president of the local NAACP, and she said, well, I wish it was a unanimous vote, but she said she would take the 8-2 because she said they had never gotten to this point before in terms of cases like this.
That actually surprised me, given the fact that they had never overturned a CMPD decision before, that they would vote to, as they did, and to vote to look at it again in an upcoming hearing. I just kind of thought this one would be signed, sealed, and delivered for CMPD. After all, Mr. Scott did have a gun. We could hear them on the tape ordering him many times to drop the gun. Now, we all know that there were reasons that he may not have dropped it, the medication, whatever.
And the traumatic brain injury. That's what the medication was for.
But yes, I was actually surprised that they chose this particular case to possibly, for the first time, go against what CMPD had recommended or ruled.
One thing was interesting, both sides presented their cases. They weren't in the room at the same time, but both sides presented their cases. And Julian Wright, who is the attorney for the Citizens Review Board, he spoke for the board afterwards. And one thing that he said is that the standard, starting in 2013, the standard was lowered in terms of what has to be proved to make a decision to let's look into this forward or to overturn the decision. And now that that has happened, they're going to have a hearing on August 8th where he said it'll be almost like a trial. You'll get...
Yeah, no, so I just want to go back to what you just said there because it's one of the more interesting points I think that came out. It's, Glenn also brought this up, the fact that the Citizens Review Board has never found against the CMPD specifically when it comes to officer-involved shootings. it's not necessarily that there weren't questions that they had. It's that the standard was higher. The bar they had to meet was higher. That now has been dropped. And do we know if that is, in fact, what tipped the balance here?
Don't know, because, again, we were not allowed inside, and they said that because of the law, they could not talk about anything that was said or the questions that they had that led them to believe that there was substantial evidence that there was error in terms of that decision. But one thing in terms of that standard before, Julian Wright said that they had to show that there was no rational basis and that there was that the chief had abused his discretion, and he was saying that was such a high standard to prove. Now they just have to show that it's 50% clear error and that everybody agree, and they have to just get a majority in terms of saying that you guys need to overturn this.
I know that the standard for criminal prosecution is much higher than it would be in a situation like this, but one of the things that I think D.A. Murray did extremely well when he decided not to press charges, he held a press conference with reporters, and he went over this thing
Painstaking detail.
In painstaking detail. And for those of us who were there, Eric, that was really an impressive presentation. And so I guess that's part of the reason why I was somewhat surprised that they chose this particular case.
They also made that 22-page report available to the public, I think, immediately. They
did.
Yeah,
they did. I think there are a couple of political dimensions that are really interesting about this. I mean, the first one is, of course, this is the same week when we're talking about reworking how this board is comprised, and they're talking a lot about not just additional training, but also much greater transparency. Meanwhile, they have a 5-hour meeting behind closed doors, so that's kind of interesting. And then the next steps, if the Citizens Review Board decides that they think the officer was in the wrong, remember, it first goes to Chief Putney. So he gets yet another miserable decision because that's a bit of a no-win decision, whatever he does. And then if, let's say that the chief sides with what the police and the DA have done, then it would go to Marcus Jones, who, of course, is the city manager and also the police chief's boss. So that would not be a real pleasant decision for him either.
And he could
go ahead, Gwen.
Oh, and I was just going to say, and he could also decide to ignore that decision as well. So the review board doesn't have any, they can make a recommendation, and that's about it.
Yeah. Now, let's skip back here just a second, because you kind of jumped ahead to what happens after this August 8th meeting, which the Citizens Review Board has set for the next step of this, I don't know what else to call this process, but they're describing it as almost a trial.
Exactly.
And I want to play a little something from Charles Monette. He is Keith Scott's, the family of Keith Scott. He is their lawyer. And Mr. Monette says that Keith Scott Widow is pleased with this week's decision and that they look forward to presenting their case at that August 8th meeting. Here's what he said.
We've been seeking a decision or a declaration that the killing of Keith Scott was not justified and that departmental rules, regulations, and guidelines do not allow the use of deadly force in a situation such as the one that Keith was in.
Now, what he's saying there, I think, is a deeper question than some of these things that we've talked about. And it was actually broached, Katie, in that 22-page report that you're talking about, which is not just the actions of this officer, Officer Vinson, who, again, has been cleared by 2 other groups, but also the tactics overall and the training involved with the police force. Have we seen any kind of movement on that front from CMPD?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think you've hit upon a really important question, because watching this play out over the past year or however long it's been at this point, that was the one sort of overwhelming question is, the DA made a very crystal clear case on how he reached the decision he did. But then I think people who had questions about tactics. Why did they approach in that way? And as far as I know, I don't know that CMPD has said anything about changes in terms of their training.
There have been some changes underway in the department for years. I mean, if you think about the cameras that they're required to wear now,
the
body cams, those were instrumental in the events that unrolled after Keith Scott's shooting. So I I'm not sure about training, though. I'm not sure if if this particular incident has triggered any change in the department training.
Well, the CMPD is still standing behind Officer Vinson, and they say that their internal investigation was completed, that he was cleared, that his actions were justified. In particular, this is what Major Estella Patterson, who works for CMPD's Internal Affairs Division, had to say.
We have had cases before where initially, just like this, they have not agreed with the chief, but once you have the full hearing and they have all the information presented before them, they have an opportunity to hear from witnesses, then they determine at that point that the chief did not err.
And that last phrase, the chief did not err, is at heart of this, because really what the Citizens Review Board does is they can basically not overturn, they can say, we don't necessarily agree with the CMPD and their decision on disciplinary action. And you were alluding to this earlier, Erik. Chief Kerr Putney is going to be in kind of a tight situation depending on what happens here.
Because, I mean, as you just pointed out, so if the decision goes to him, and let's say they do think he erred, okay, whatever he says feels like it's freighted. Well, he didn't do anything because why would he sort of go against his own finding? How much public pressure comes with this? I think this is going to be a really fascinating thing to watch, especially in terms of if it is a trial-like proceeding. How strongly does the public react? How do they, who turns up? All those kinds of things. How does that weigh into what ultimately happens?
I agree that he's in a no-win situation. It's been said that every U.S. president is kind of a reaction to the president who came before him, and so you have to wonder how much this decision may have been affected. This decision by Chief Putney may have been affected by Chief Monroe's decision in the
Carrick.
Michael Carrick. He took a lot of heat, and there were a lot of people inside and outside the police department who felt that Chief Monroe acted too hastily in that case, and from what we heard, there was backlash within the police department. So you kind of wonder if Chief Putney's decision this time, if that record was kind of playing in the back of his mind.
Especially because he's talked about how much tension there has been within the department. Right. So you're exactly right.
And with this, they're going to look at video. They're going to look at all kinds of, have exhibits, and they're going to have witnesses, and all sides will get a chance to testify. So it would be like this is a major trial.
But the other thing is, I want to go back to, I think it is very confusing for the public to figure out exactly what this means, how much clout this group has. I know we've just gone through it, but I still think it's kind of a murky thing in the minds of the public. Exactly what can they do or what can't they do?
They can't bring any criminal charges against.
Correct.
Oh, no, I know that, but I'm just saying, I think for someone out in the public just watching this, it's just kind of like, well, okay, so we've already had the police department, we've had the DA, but wait, now we have this board, but it would go back to the police, and what's going on here?
And you had a couple of people who were out in the hallway who were saying they were upset that they could not go inside and hear this. And so, again, you're right, a lot of people don't know what kind of lack of power this board has and the rules. And they said they wish they could get inside, and that because they were still saying that they felt like they did not get justice the last time around.
Now, I want to end this segment. We've got about 30 seconds, Erik, but today's news that Charlotte's fire chief, John Hannon, who served for 38 years in the department, is retiring. He's stepping away. Big deal?
Yeah, I think so, because it's been such a big part of city politics with the Crystal Eschert case, and he clearly did not have the best relationship with the previous city manager. So, yeah, this has been a notable tenure, or end of tenure.
I would say so. All right, up next, two people start high-profile jobs, one by mowing the lawn. You're listening to Local News Roundup here on Charlotte Talks. Does anyone else want to
Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Fresh Market, celebrating July 4th with fresh ingredients for friendly get-togethers, including seasonal produce, meats, and seafood, and more. Online at thefreshmarket.com. By now, you've heard WFAE has been celebrating 35 years as Charlotte's NPR news source. The anniversary of our sign-on date was last week. To mark the occasion, we brought a public radio icon and broadcasting pioneer to town. Susan Stanberg, an NPR veteran, shared how she broke new ground as well as the stories she has covered and the people she has met in her more than 45 years with NPR. And she discussed the future of broadcasting. We'll listen to that conversation with Susan Stamberg when Charlotte Talks Monday morning at 9. The local news roundup continues in just a moment.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. Coming up on the next On Point, GOP healthcare plans on hold. Cyber attacks go global. A partial travel ban is on. Our weekly news roundtable goes behind the headlines. That's coming up on the next On Point from NPR.
The news roundup continues next hour with On Point from 10 till noon. Here on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
This is Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE, 90.3 WFHE in Hickory. I'm Tom Bullock, and it is, of course, the local news roundup with Erik Spanberg of the Charlotte Business Journal, Glenn Burkins of QCityMetro, Katie Peralta with the Charlotte Observer, and WFAE's own Gwendolyn Glenn. We're going to start with a bit of yard work. Last Friday, Clayton Wilcox hopped on a riding lawnmower and cut the grass at Reed Park Academy. And if you don't know Clayton Wilcox's name yet, you will hear it a lot over the coming weeks and months. And it's not because he's got a magical green thumb. On Monday, Wilcox will take over as the superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. So, Clayton Wilcox was not given the usual rollout of a CMS superintendent. He was not really presented to the public. He did not attend the press conference where it was announced that he was going to take over running the school system. So what do we think? I mean, was this...
You just got a John Deere tractor instead.
Yeah, basically. I mean, well, let's take the skeptic's point of view and the realist point of view. Is this a PR kind of move, or is this kind of a sign of a different kind of superintendent taking over CMS?
Oh, I think it's a PR move.
Well, we would have been much more impressive had it been a push more.
Flintstones.
That is true.
I think it's probably a combination of both. I think the public relations end of it was very intentional, though, and I think the reason for that is to reduce expectations. What we've done in Charlotte and a lot of other places is had this big sort of extended introduction, fairly glitzy, or at least glitzy, I guess, by CMS standards anyway, that the Savior has arrived. And so I think what they're trying to do here is make it a much more low-key affair. And I think Clayton Wilcox embraces that as well, which is that I'm part of this, but I'm not the answer alone. I'm just part of a larger system that has a lot of good pieces in place. So I think
that's probably a very smart move on his part, because as we all know, CMS is facing some tremendous challenges right now. And if I were coming into his position, the last thing I would want to do is to appear to be the knight riding in on a white horse to save the city or to save the school district, when in fact there are some very deep and abiding challenges he's going to face.
Yeah, and he had talked about that the shape of the buildings is one of the things that he has mentioned that he's concerned about. So I guess mowing the lawn was one of the things that he's saying, I'm going to make these buildings look better. And if you also remember, Reed Park is one of the schools that will be very much affected by the student assignment plan. Mm. So it was interesting that he chose that school to do his
and remember, I mean, symbols matter. You know, Heath Morrison, for example.
I'm pretty sure I would not have seen him on a riding lawnmower.
Yeah, I mean, remember, he sort of came in as very much the rock star. He had won all the awards. He only needed 4 hours of sleep, and he was very much this, sort of on the go, big ideas kind of person. You didn't get the sense that Heath Morrison was down in the trenches with people at CMS. You know, that he just had a different style. So I think this could serve Clayton Wilcox really well. I mean, don't I guess shortchange the idea of just seeing the top guy out there, doing some physical labor.
So here's the trick, though. He is now, and again, he'll start on Monday, Wilcox will become the 5th CMS superintendent in 7 years. That's a lot of turnover. I mean, Katie, do you think it's having an effect?
Well, I certainly think that the system would like you to think that. And I think that they've touted a lot of the changes that they pushed to make in the recent years. I mean, if you look at rising graduation rates, if you look at things like the decision to vote, the decision to have that student reassignment plan, I think that Glenn used the term managing expectations. I think that's a good way to phrase it, because these changes obviously are gradual and they've taken a lot of churn to make them happen. But at the same time, he's got a full plate. So I think that it's a big ask of one person who is brand new to Charlotte, too.
Yeah. But you're right. It's starting to feel like the late 70s New York Yankees or something. We're going through a lot of
Erik Spanberg with your random sports analogy.
I mean, 5 and 7 years. That's... Yeah.
But let me go back, Erik, to something that you said, that this is, he may be allowing someone else to shine, where you've had prior superintendents who have been happy to be the center of attention. In particular, Clayton Wilcox said that maybe it's time for a guy who just comes in and rolls up his sleeves and just does the work and lets the board shine, meaning the school board. My question, I'm sorry, Gwen, but my question is this. Our school board is in the midst of a very kind of public fight. I mean, they've agreed on things like school assignment, but there are big divisions in the school board on lots of issues. Is this really a time where the board itself can shine?
Well, when you say they agreed on school assignment, there was a big division along racial lines on many of the issues in that school assignment plan. So there is a lot of, I would say, dissension. And one thing, too, that's interesting, when I read that comment that he said that it's time for the school board to shine, when he was in Florida, when he was superintendent in Florida, there he left early before his contract was over, and I asked him about that, how long do you plan to stay here? But one thing, he had a lot of conflict with the board's attorney. It got to the point where they had to even bring in mediation between him and the board's attorney and a couple of the board members. It wasn't a very good relationship he had. When I asked him about that, he said, well, I was much younger then. I've matured now. I didn't listen a lot then. I listen more now, and I'm an older person now, and I approach things in a different way.
A kinder, gentler superintendent. I have to wonder whether just being around, because he's obviously been around for, several months, and so he's kind of been shadowing Ann Clark as she ends her tenure. Just looking at the environment, seeing what he's inheriting, I mean, this might just be simply looking around saying, oh, yeah, I don't know that I want to just dive right out there and be in the middle of the road, and particularly not only with the student reassignment, but remember, he's got the light lift of $1 billion bond package coming up in the fall, so this is probably, a survival strategy at minimum.
I agree 100%, Erik. I think in this case, and I hate to be the cynic here, but I think let the board shine could also just be euphemism for keep my head low.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's the nail that sticks up is the one that gets hammered down, and there may be some benefit to that. He might be able to be more effective if he's not seen as being too high profile. He might be able to actually work behind the scenes more and get some things done.
So, of course, with Wilcox coming in and starting on Monday, it means that Ann Clark's tenure ends. And yes, she was an interim superintendent. She always said publicly she didn't want the job full time. But she was there through a lot of, we'll say, trying times, especially, again, with student assignment. What do we think? I mean, panel, how would you rate Ann Clark's tenure?
I'm not sure that I can put a rating on it, but I would.
Come on, school grade. That's what we're supposed to do.
I would, yeah, exactly. A B+. I would say she's the ultimate survivor. Was she something like 34 years in the system or something? It was really a long time. So think how many superintendents. You just said 5 and 7 years. I don't know what the math is with the rest of it, which is why I'm not giving a grade, because I'm not good with math. But I mean, it really is incredible that she survived all those years. She had all those different jobs, and it was interesting to hear at the end of her run that the thing she really talked about was her influence with students. So clearly, at minimum, her heart was in the right place all those years in the system.
No, go ahead.
When I talk to a lot of parents and talk to people outside of the school board, you hear a lot of people who are very critical of her in terms of she was not the superintendent, but she was an assistant superintendent. I'm pretty sure when a lot of the schools on the west side were closed.
And that was pretty controversial.
Yeah, that was the Peter Gorman era, right?
Exactly. So she gets a lot of blame for that, and that followed her as she was the interim superintendent. And also, you had a lot of people, and when I would attend, especially those meetings in terms of the student assignment, those meetings were very passionate. People were upset and would at times point fingers and say, Ann Clark, shame on you, in terms of what was happening with the schools, especially some of the magnet schools and the schools on the west side, which a lot of the parents felt like they still were getting a bad deal there. So from parents and talking to parents and people in the community, there are a lot who said, you're pushing this just so you can have this as your legacy. And I asked her about that, and she said, oh, it's not about Ann Clark. You know, I'm taking direction from the board and that kind of thing, but you have a lot of people in the community who are buying that.
She came in under facing a tremendous amount of skepticism in the African American community in particular, in part because of those school closings that Gwendolyn talked about. But when I talk to people who have actually gotten to know her and people who have worked with her, not so much parents, but community leaders, they all praise her. They all say that she has done a tremendous job. And I've actually heard some say, I have changed my mind about her. I wasn't too thrilled going in, but those who have worked most closely with her in the community, at least those with whom I've spoken, think she's done a tremendous job given the hand she was dealt.
All right, I want to turn to another high-profile civil servant position. That's easy for me to say. I think I need more coffee. Alma Gibby Harris started work this week as the interim director of the Mecklenburg County Health Department, replacing, of course, Marcus Plesha. And Harris's tenure began as the Charlotte Observer reported the problems with the health department may go far beyond the controversy over pap smear tests and not alerting women that use the clinic to unusual pap smear results, potentially problematic to say the least. That is, of course, one of the big reasons that Plesha resigned. Katie, I'll start with you. What was the latest in the Observer report?
So the Observer report found via public records request that there had been an internal investigation and there were several red flags raised that kind of the initial investigation didn't show up as many women who might have been alerted about the abnormal pap smears, and it shows that within the system there were a lot more concerns about leadership, basically. And I think that before there was, kind of chatter about. There are a lot of people under the current director or the former director who were kind of uncertain about his leadership techniques or the effectiveness of how they were managing clinics and things like that. But this kind of just gave more credence to it and said that these problems ran way deeper and were way more widespread throughout the healthcare community, nurses, doctors, things like. When they on the clinic level, and I think we talked about this last time I was on the panel, but at the clinic level, when they tried to when they made an effort to improve processes, they glossed over things like I don't even remember what it was.
No, it's funny. You're right. We talk about this a lot, but it seems like there's this constant drip.
Well, I was going to say, can I offer a healthcare tip to the county? Rip the Band-Aid off. I mean, it's just killing them over and over. These things keep coming out, and it's always, okay, we've solved this. This is what happened. Oh, wait a minute. This came out. Oh, okay, now we've dealt with it. Oh, wait a minute. There's something else in the closet. I mean, it's just, they've made it so much worse. It's awful to begin with, but they're making it much worse. And you just feel like they need to come out with a comprehensive report on exactly what's wrong and exactly how they're going to address it.
And they've hired someone to do that.
And they have. I was going to say, as I was saying that.
Let's get to that here in a second, but I want to get back to the Charlotte Observer report because it's just a good, example of public records requests and journalism really being a keystone. In those public records requests, the Charlotte Observer found an email and reports and numerous things from a nurse named Julie Seacrest. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She's a nurse with 18 years of experience charged with doing the internal review of the department, and she wrote, quote, "The problem is much worse than I was told, and it includes poor performing employees, bad supervision, bad data management, bad clinical procedures, bad internal assessment of the problem, bad triage, and incomplete corrective actions." And that's not all she had to write. This, to me, sounds like they've got, rip the Band-Aid off. They may have to start at the studs and rebuild the whole thing.
I think it takes things like this. The health department does regulation of restaurants, pools,
Sure.
Health clinics. It's not just the healthcare, the health thing and the pools that we reported on earlier this summer. But because these are such kind of visceral issues, you think of Pap smears and you know what that means. It's STD tests that can carry a lot of weight. And I think that when you kind of delve into the nitty-gritty details of these, it's important to do that because to understand the full breadth of what the health department does is it's pretty staggering. And these problems obviously run much deeper than just the healthcare clinics.
And it also said the numbers were higher.
Correct.
Than what was reported.
It went from 200 to 300.
300, right? Yeah. And I guess, too, as you mentioned, the health department also oversees pool safety and restaurants, and I'm sure people are now wondering, okay, if this is happening, yes, exactly, what's going on in these other areas?
I've been a reporter now for more than 30 years in a number of different cities, and unfortunately, when it comes to health departments, finding examples like this is almost like shooting fish in a barrel. Health departments nationwide are notoriously bad in some cases in delivering quality health care. And I think the unfortunate part is that what we're seeing here in Mecklenburg County is playing right into that. Those of us in the media who have had the ear of people inside the health department now for a long time, a number of years, long before this came up, we'd been hearing reports of low morale. We'd been hearing reports that of problems, whether it's testing or just delivery of quality health care. So this has broken into the open, and as you point out, we've got a new interim health director coming in who is going to have her hands full. If I had to choose between her job and Wilcox and the school board, I actually think I would choose him.
Yeah, I think I'd get on the lawnmower and just have a little peace and quiet. Yeah. And of course, I think you're probably going into this next.
Yep.
The interim director who comes, with
she's got a great resume,
lot of
for
great
the job.
credentials.
Let's say that up front. She's got great credentials.
Absolutely.
She already has another job.
Right. She's already coming in a storm of controversy because her firm is, of course, working for the county on a contract to try and help the county figure out how to run the health department better. And Pat Cotham and Jim Puckett on the county commission have made a lot of noise, to say the least, about how these are, quote, horrible optics, I think is what Jim Puckett said. So it's already a mess, and she's just getting to work.
I think from a PR perspective, she will be a lot smarter than her predecessor in terms of public relations. Yesterday morning, before the Observer story broke, she made herself available to local media to talk. I was one of the people who interviewed her by phone. And we talked extensively about some of her priorities there. And she said all the things that you would expect an incoming interim director to say. There were no surprises there. I asked her if she wanted to keep the job beyond the 6 months. She signed a 6-month contract with options to renew. She was kind of non-committal on that. She said she hadn't thought about it, but she didn't rule it out either.
So that's interesting. Perhaps a little bit of stability here would also help. But of course, we still have controversy too in terms of the fact that her report is coming out here shortly, and we'll have to see how county commissioners take it in terms of being truly independent. All right, short break. After the short break that's coming up, we'll talk soccer, Google TV, and a big red stamp. You're listening to the local news roundup on Charlotte Talks.
Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Nantahala Outdoor Center, offering its Adventure Pass, combining stand-up paddle boarding, rafting, and zip lining, as well as mountain biking, into a single day of family adventure. More at NOC.com. And from Fresh Dental, offering a full suite of general, cosmetic, and restorative services designed to treat each family member, accepting new patient appointments Monday to Saturday with locations in Charlotte and Indian Trail. FreshDentalCLT.com. The Senate GOP health care bill is put on hold while the Supreme Court allows President Trump's travel ban to partially take effect. And a ransomware attack hits the U.S. and dozens of countries worldwide. On Point with Tom Ashbrook continues the look at the week's news next hour at 10, following the Charlotte Talks local news roundup here on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE.
Between meetings, appointments, reminders, staying in tune with the news can seem tough.
It was a truck bomb in a
Supreme Court to lift an injunction.
The Medicaid cuts are even more draconian than the House.
Morning Edition checks the facts and adds background so you know what's going on and you understand why and what it means. Listen to Morning Edition every day.
Stay connected at 90.7 WFAE and at WFAE.org.
This is Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE. I'm Tom Bullock, and it's the local news roundup with Katie Peralta of the Charlotte Observer, Gwendolyn Glenn from WFAE, Glenn Burkins of QCityMetro, and Erik Spanberg of the Charlotte Business Journal. And Erik, let's start this segment with a story you have been covering with puns aplenty. The latest,
I'm running out.
I don't think so. The latest headline was this: decision on Major League Soccer stadium heads for overtime in Charlotte.
See, look what I did there.
Look what you did there. So what's the latest on this?
So it's just the story that won't die in terms of sports. It looked like this bid for an MLS team had pretty much come unraveled. The city didn't do anything in terms of funding. The county deferred its decision until August, and now, lo and behold, City Council has come back for a little bit more, and so they're going to hear a proposal in July, a little bit scaled down for $30 million. And then it sounds like they would vote at the end of August, and I'm assuming the county would defer their vote from August 2nd. They haven't said yet what they'll do. All of that is leading into trying to get one of the two expansion teams to be awarded later this year.
So it's not dead, it's not alive.
It's life support.
It's like the zombie proposal.
Yeah, exactly. The zombie proposal.
All right.
I'll work with that in my next headline.
Oh, please don't. Katie, you reported this week that Google TV will offer, or Google rather, I already jumped my own headline there, that Google will offer TV service for those people on their fiber network. What are the details, and is this a surprise?
No. First of all, I don't think it's a surprise given Google announced this earlier this year, I think it was February, that their YouTube TV would be unrolling. They're doing it by market to market, which confused me at first because it's like, internet. Why don't you just launch it all at the same time? But they have to work out deals with local TV affiliates, basically NBC, CBS. You also get ESPN. I'm sure there'll be some sort of delay with sports, but we'll see about that. So, in Charlotte, it's a $35 a month deal geared specifically toward cord cutters. Read that as probably millennials who, don't want all of the bells and whistles associated with traditional cable. So for Google, to answer your question, this isn't surprising because there have been a lot of other companies rolling out their own TV services, be it, I know Hulu's doing live TV now, AT&T has a service. So it's just kind of, it's one more thing Google has to offer, one more way Google's taking over the world, I guess. And I think
one fiber network at a time.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a slightly different thing, but didn't I read this week that Facebook is going to develop some original content, some original television type?
Are we down
My
to
family photos aren't enough original content?
Are we down to 5 companies that are going to run the world?
Cat pictures.
All right, let's shift from cat pictures to lawmakers. There is no clean segue for that one. Early Friday morning, the General Assembly did something they haven't done in years. They adjourned their legislative session on time. But before they did, the Republican supermajorities in the House and Senate overrode a Democratic veto from Governor Roy Cooper of the state budget. So, Erik, I know you follow politics like I do. Let's start with this. File this one under news we all knew was on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what's interesting is, all of us around this table have watched Governor Cooper try to really leverage public opinion. That was really the only thing he had to work with because there's a supermajority, obviously, in both chambers of the General Assembly. And he called on business leaders, he called on just the general public to ask or demand that the tax cuts be shelved in favor of bigger investments in education and other programs. And it just simply never really amounted to much. And that's why you see what happened this week.
And I have to say the vetoes came not surprisingly, pretty quickly. But that olive branch to lawmakers did actually surprise me, because there are a lot of really contentious points in this budget, like, slashing the Attorney General's office budget significantly,
and the governor's,
well, that one you could argue. I mean, that's just,
yeah.
I don't think anybody was all that surprised given some of the other things that have happened. But was anyone surprised that they didn't, try to roll back some of these what seemed to be, I don't know, almost payback measures to someone like Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein?
When you have a supermajority, and given the given what we've seen out of this legislature, I don't think anyone was surprised. We've seen a lot of things passed by this legislature that have been overturned by courts. Mm-hmm. You mentioned one of the things in this bill would, I guess, slash the budget for people on the executive side to hire lawyers. Mm-hmm. Private lawyers to challenge laws put in place by the legislature. I'm no lawyer, but that seems a little funny to me. I would be surprised if that could pass the smell test in court. But we've seen this legislature do things like that over and over again. They legislate on one hand, and they appear to seek retaliation on the other hand.
I was going to say, this General Assembly, or the leadership in particular, and I'm thinking of Phil Berger first and foremost.
The Senate Pro Tem, the leader of the Senate.
Yeah, the leader of the Senate. I mean, they've taken advantage of every situation that they can. And, it just depends on what side you're on, in a lot of cases, how you feel about it. But they have certainly used every opportunity to punish their opposition as much as they can, and I think this budget reflects it.
So does their recent decision to start impeachment proceedings of Elaine Marshall.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
That's a nice pivot.
It was a nice pivot. Now, and that's one of these things that's interesting. This happened at a press conference a few months ago from a single Republican lawmaker who said that he was calling on North Carolina's Secretary of State, position I don't think most people fully understand what she does. It's really more about regulation than, she's not Rex Tillerson. But he called on her to resign because he said he had discovered that she had allowed some illegal immigrants who are here under the DACA program, basically dreamers or deferred, deportees, to become notary publics. Now, that is pretty esoteric. But this call, which went unnoticed for some time, now has suddenly gained steam.
It's pretty remarkable, too, because they haven't done this in, I think, over 100 years.
Over a century, yeah. That's right.
The last time they did was when they impeached a lawmaker for fighting the KKK, and then the state later issued an apology in 2011, 2011. So anyway, this is pretty unprecedented, and our editorial board described it as our own witch hunt in North Carolina because it's undercutting your opposition in any possible way you can. Marshall's obviously a Democrat, GOP controls both other chambers, so it's stunning. Anyone else? Sorry.
Well, unless I misunderstand, at this point we haven't moved past the investigation stage. We haven't reached the point yet where we're actually at impeachment or talking about impeachment. And I'm kind of mixed feeling there. One, I think that it seems to me that they could have probably hammered this out without some big investigation, and sure. Certainly without talk of impeachment. But that said, if what they want to do is investigate whether she has done wrongdoing, I don't have a problem with that. Either she has done or she hasn't done. And if it's a fair investigation, she should be vindicated.
Well, I agree with you. I think that it probably could have been resolved with fewer fireworks since it's 4th of July, but they opted to go in a different direction. So here we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up the investigation because the official investigation, hasn't really even been launched.
Right.
This is actually, something that an individual lawmaker has found.
And they had the committee vote to start the investigation. And the General Assembly gavelled itself closed, as I was saying, 2 a.m. Friday morning. But it's only a kind of adjournment. They've ended their regular session, but they've called for up to 3 special sessions to happen before the end of the year. And 2 of those would be able to focus on this
this investigation and possible impeachment. So it's, you almost have to wonder, is this worth the time and taxpayer money that lawmakers seem to be willing to put into this?
If I'm reading this correctly, it seems to be more about an interpretation of the law, much more so than wrongdoing, which is why I said, as Erik put it, you would think that they could have resolved this in a way with far fewer fireworks.
Well, speaking of the law, the General Assembly has seen a string of U.S. Supreme Court decisions, 3 to be precise, that ruled that they had passed laws that were unconstitutional. But this week, the General Assembly got a win from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and this deals with the magistrate bill, this bill that would allow magistrates to opt out of performing all marriages if they wanted to not perform same-sex marriages. Who wants to give their first opinion of this ruling?
Well, I think the thing that struck me, we talked about this a little bit before the show, is just that this was an issue where Republican Governor Pat McCrory and the General Assembly were actually on opposite sides. And it's just interesting that the Republican legislature has continued to push this, and so now now we've arrived where we've arrived.
Yeah, but one thing that's interesting about this ruling is it seems in a way, and I'm not trying to take sides here at all, but it seems that you could argue that this is a bit of a technicality.
Yes.
They did not. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yes, it was a technicality. They ruled that the plaintiffs in the case didn't have standing, and it was pretty much, well, it was a unanimous ruling, if I understand it correctly, and the fact that all of the justices agreed that they didn't have standing, I think that gives cover to those who think this is a bad law, but at the end of the day, it was very much a technical ruling and not a ruling on the merits of the case. Those are still going to have to be hammered out at some point down the road.
Exactly.
Because the minute that some magistrate refuses to marry someone, then that person's going to have standing. It's going to be right back where we were.
The thing it made me think about is just how we are in North Carolina. I mean, it's just a constant stream of court cases and appeals. Politically, we just can't agree on anything, or the leadership can't agree on anything. And so everything has to be fought out in court, and it's really never over. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And
like as Glenn said, the ruling said that the ones who were suing didn't have standing. Someone else could come up who could show harm, that these could not show that they had been harmed by this particular law. And I was just reading as well, I mean, this is an issue that is not just in North Carolina, but I even read recently where a judge in Wyoming was censured because she said she would not marry same-sex couples. And she wasn't asked to step down from the bench, but she has been censured. And so that's an issue. It's an issue that's not just here in North Carolina.
That's true. To bring it a little bit more close to home, let's talk a little bit about the Charlotte City Council this week when they got rid of what's called the Extraordinary Event Ordinance. This ordinance is, or I guess I should now say was, controversial. Why?
A lot of people say that it was overused. Back in the day, they would use it only a handful of times for, let's think this past year, or rather last season. The Panthers used it twice, or the city rather used it twice for the playoff games. They would use it for, like DNC type of events back in the day. So this allowed the city to engage more police officers. They would expect higher crowds, things like that. But people were concerned that it also raised the level of, alertness and,
Well, it allowed the police to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to do.
Limiting civil, or yes, they were able to really clamp down and make some very strict regulations when you were going uptown. And as Katie's saying, what it turned into was everything was an extraordinary event. In fact, Chief Putney said that. He said, when everything's extraordinary, nothing's extraordinary.
But the funny part was everything was extraordinary, but they never really did that much. with it. It's not like they were out stopping people on the streets during extraordinary events, checking backpacks or whatever. The one time other than the DNC that I can clearly recall them doing something was shortly after the Keith Scott killing, when we had a Panthers game. They were checking bags and people who were in that area. But other than that, whether it was the CIAA or the 4th of July or whatever, they would declare it an extraordinary event. But
well, and let's think about the CIAA. I mean, I know it didn't happen actually at the tournament site, but you had those shots fired. What was it? 100, 200, I don't even remember.
At least 100.
Yeah, at least 100. And, you know, the extraordinary event did not make a difference in that.
Gwen.
And I was saying people think that it has the potential, though, in terms of stopping and stop and frisk. And I think that's what concerned a lot of people, that if you declare it an extraordinary event, then, you know, events like CIAA, when you have a lot of people of color in the city, concerned that you can legally just stop me and I'm not doing anything. So
Absolutely.
It's that potential.
And I think they're moving towards a system where they're going to try to cordon off major events to kind of create security zones. I think that's what they're wanting to do. I don't know if they can, but I think that's, from a security standpoint, what they're trying to do.
Well, but, you know, my question is, they used this 41 times over 5 years. This was not anywhere near martial law, but this certainly wasn't the regular order of business in terms of what police can and cannot do.
Right. Well, so you couldn't wear a mask. I mean, there were all kinds of things.
So
backpacks and
it's one of those tools where they did not use it to its fullest extent, but there are going to be times, I wonder, if the police are going to say, hey, this is something that we would have liked to be able to do. So do we think there's a chance that, I don't know, not an extraordinary event ordinance, but something like it resurfaces anytime soon?
I would only imagine that they would. I mean, we have All-Star game coming up in 2019, for instance. That will draw huge crowds, people out of town, things like that. So I don't know if it'll be an extraordinary event, but my question was, when that came out, was, so now what? You know, what will come up in its place, or like what will they do when they do need a stronger police presence, or anything like that in the future?
And you get the last word. I'm sorry, Gwen, we're out of time. That's Katie Peralta with the Charlotte Observer, WFAE's Gwendolyn Glenn. Promise you can say more when you come back next time. Glenn Burkins of QCityMetro also joined us, and as did Erik Spanberg with the Charlotte Business Journal. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the hour.